I'm Crispino Ojeda Simmons with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and we are a membership organization of the Chicago region's 275 cities, towns, and villages. Sidewalks play a vital role as conduits for pedestrian movement and access. They enhance connectivity and promote walking. And for us, they're very important as part of the work that we do with our communities in the DEI, age-friendly housing, and environmental sustainability spaces. This morning, I'm joined by UIC and Active Transportation Alliance, and I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
All right, I'll start off. I'm Yochai Eisenberg. I'm at the University of Illinois at Chicago in the Department of Disability and Human Development, and I'm an assistant professor there and lead our Project Sidewalk study. I'll turn it over to Mackenzie.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Hayes. I'm a research associate with the Department of Disability and Human Development, and I work with Project Sidewalk.
And I'm Maggie Sherwinski from the Active Transportation Alliance. I'm the Director of Community Building and Leadership, and our organization advocates for better walking, biking, and transit for the Chicagoland region.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started then. What we're going to cover today, and if you're just joining us, we're just asking folks to put their names and their organization that they're with in the chat, so we have a sense of who's here. And what we're going to go over today is give you a dive into Project Sidewalk, what it is, what is the data that comes from it, how does the process work for labeling and validating the data from Project Sidewalk, and how can it specifically be used for grant applications. And then we're lucky to be able to partner with MMC and with Active Transportation Alliance, who's going to then share more details on the ITEP grant and cover kind of a lot of these basics in terms of an overview, who can apply, and what makes a good application. So look forward to spending this hour with you. Feel free to, as always, ask questions in the chat. We'll have some designated Q&A time at the end and some polls along the way, but look forward to an engaging webinar. So we will dive in initially here to talking about Project Sidewalk. And wanted to kind of preface things by, thinking about this image of a person holding a bunch of stuff back in their closet. And, we could kind of think of pedestrian infrastructure and especially ADA related problems with pedestrian infrastructure as kind of the stuff that you have in your closet, right? That you don't really want to deal with. It's there, and maybe you say, oh, one day I'll organize it, one day I'll figure out what the issues are. And I think this is kind of the approach that a lot of communities have taken. And obviously there's a lot of other things that communities are addressing. But now more than ever, there's an urgency to address ADA related issues. And so, I kind of prefer to use, this metaphor more of the ADA pedestrian issues as being the elephant in the room, right? It is really an urgent issue that can't be looked away at anymore, because what's on the line, right, is safety, independence, health, and even climate change, addressing climate change impacts in terms of improving walking, wheeling, and biking in communities. And of course, the phrase with the elephant in the room is to address it, you need to name it and tame it. And in this case, Project Sidewalk is a tool that communities can use to name this elephant, and in this case, name the sidewalk related issues. What are the particular things going on in our community related to the sidewalk network, curb ramps, and the qualities of that? And then organize the community's efforts to plan and improve and address those issues. And there's many resources out there to help support doing that, especially now in our current funding landscape to address infrastructure issues. And so that's what we're hoping this webinar gets us to, is a better understanding to how your community can take action and take advantage of these resources. So jumping into Project Sidewalk. Project Sidewalk is a free online tool to remotely label and assess sidewalk features and problems. It utilizes crowdsourced approach to data collection and can be used by volunteer groups, trained interns, or city officials. And it's a data collection tool, a civic engagement tool, and it supports planning efforts, data analysis, and visualization. And I think one of the key things that sets Project Sidewalk apart from traditional approaches to sidewalk maintenance is that a lot of times what ends up being at the top of the list in terms of sidewalk maintenance is what residents request or complain about. But that process is not necessarily equitable, and it doesn't provide a holistic understanding of where are all the existing barriers. And this process may in fact just kind of build upon existing inequalities. So, what we try to explain with Project Sidewalk is that it's an approach, perhaps a more equitable approach that can be used by decision makers to get a more complete picture of their community in order to better prioritize infrastructure improvements. Project Sidewalk is primarily a crowdsourcing tool. I'll preface that and say that it doesn't have to be. We are working with certain communities around the country, and some have chosen to make it private and just use their own staff to collect this data. But we try to promote it as a tool that supports community engagement. It involves residents as community scientists. Residents can feel a stronger connection to their community. It helps expedite the data collection process, which for those who attempted to try sidewalk auditing in person is long and laborious. And it provides an opportunity for residents to voice their concerns, gets people interested and engaged and invested in their pedestrian advocacy, and allows decision makers to better understand community needs. So the process that we're going to cover today and kind of explain these different parts throughout our presentation is kind of organized in this flow chart here. We're going to cover these different elements and think of these as the steps that you could use in preparing for a grant application like the ITEP grants that we're going to be covering today. So this would include training on how to use Project Sidewalk. It might involve you choosing a smaller focus area to focus efforts on for this grant application. We'll explain about how the data collection works and the validation of the data that comes from the process. And then that could include taking updated photos because part of our process uses Google Street View, and even though Google Street View has driven in our area in very recently in terms of 2021 and 2022, you may want to go in person to get kind of up-to-date photos. And then this moves you to choosing priority areas and then examining your IDOT community score. And Maggie will get a little bit more into what this means, along with confirming the project with IDOT and then preparing and submitting your application. And one of the key things that I think hopefully you take away from this webinar is that using Project Sidewalk, community involvement is going to be a key part of your process and a key strength to your application because you will be able to involve your community in all these different steps to preparing your application and deciding on priority areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie Hayes right now to give you an overview of what the Project Sidewalk interface looks like and how it works.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And yes, now I'll kind of go into some of the different missions within Project Sidewalk and what other features the interface provides. So this is what you see when you sign into the Project Sidewalk website. It immediately falls within the Chicago area. So from here, you can create an account to track your missions. In the top here, you can see we have Explore, Validate, How to Label, API for exporting data, and then some additional tools we provide. But we'll go into some more of these detailed tools later. So Project Sidewalk collects data on the sidewalk network through missions. there are two types of missions. The first one, find, label, and assess sidewalks, and the second one is validating on correcting previously placed labels. All right, next slide. So first, we're going to go into labeling missions and explain what they are. Sorry, next slide. So within the sidewalk auditing mission, there are 7 main labeling types in Project Sidewalk. These labels include curb ramps, missing curb ramps, obstacles in path, surface problems, no sidewalk, crosswalk, pedestrian signal, and there's an additional one not shown here, and it is a label for when you cannot see the sidewalk. All right, and then next slide. And so when looking at these labels, each label is accompanied by a set of 4 to 8 descriptive tags and a 1 to 5 severity rating. The descriptive tags help better describe the feature or barrier, and the severity rating provides whether it is passable or not passable for a person with disabilities. The above example shows 8 different barriers that would receive the obstacle in path label. So tree, fire hydrant, vegetation, parked car, pole, all of these would receive the obstacle and path label. And then once this label is placed, you will be prompted with the screen that provides the descriptive labels and the severity rating. Okay, next slide. This is what the user would see when beginning a labeling mission in Project Sidewalk. So we can go to the next slide. So in the top of the screen, the top of the interface has the 8 label types. The view user navigates the street through the lens of Google Street View in the main screen, and the right side provides the overall stats, the mission stats, and where you are on your route in the mission map. All right, next slide.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, part of this design is to kind of set up like a game-like interface, and thinking about like human computer interaction and how to engage residents. Our colleagues at University of Washington who developed Project Sidewalk, you know, really focused on that part of it and on, you know, how do you make different elements like icons and graphics able to be kind of easily grasped by the general public.
Yeah. And so here's an example of the labeling process. So in the Google screen, we can see that there is a curb ramp. So once you see the curb ramp, then you will it is your turn to press the curb ramp label in the label types so you can place that label. So next screen. So next you will select the curb ramp label type. And then we will drag the label to where the curb ramp is located in Google Street View. And the next slide. And so after you place this label, then you will be prompted to select the appropriate descriptive tags and the severity rating and optional descriptive text. Next slide. Sorry. Okay. The user will select points into traffic because the curb ramp is angled into the center of the street, and the surface problem because of the patch of grass creating an uneven surface for the user. These problems reduce the safety of the feature, so it can then be rated a 2 on the severity rating scale. And this is just one example of the different label types. Not all of them have descriptive tags, not all of them have a severity rating, but most do. And then the next screen.
Yeah, and just to add a note that each of the different labels here has a different interface in terms of what those tags are. And then, you know, through our training, that's really where we get into the weeds of how do you go about labeling and rating each of these features. And then this is also embedded in the tool itself. Before you start a mission, there's some reminders that show both correct labeling and then incorrect labeling through this graphical interface.
Yeah, and just to provide some additional notes on labeling missions. So like Yohai said, we do conduct trainings for people getting started with the tool. So the trainings are supported by the Project Sidewalk team, and we train local team leads and also the public when we have mapping events. So oftentimes to encourage participation, you can make it into a competition. And then often in our deployment, we break up larger community areas into smaller areas, like for example, wards in Chicago, or neighborhoods elsewhere. And then to complete the auditing of community, we will set timelines and weekly objectives for the involved group. Okay, and now we're going to get into validation missions. Next slide. So here we're going to provide some examples of what a validation mission will look like, and then we'll test your knowledge. All right, next slide. So here is an example of the validation interface. It asks, is this a curb ramp? You know, what do you think? So looking at this picture, it is a curb ramp. It is a cut in the curb with a tactile warning to allow for pedestrians to cross the street. So some visual indicators of this is it's at a street crossing. So right next to that crosswalk, it's, sorry, it's in line with the crosswalk. And you can see that tactile warning. Next slide. Sorry. Next slide. All right. So here's another example. What do you think? Is this a missing curb ramp? If you guys are interested, you can go ahead and put an answer in the chat if you agree or disagree with this label. All right, well, maybe I'll keep you guys guessing. The answer is no, it is not a curb ramp. It is actually, it's not a sidewalk for the public. It is a pedestrian path, so it does not need a curb ramp. So the validator would press disagree, and then they would provide that comment to help the user in the future get a better understanding. Okay.
And Brian in the chat brings up a great point in terms of understanding the context and understanding potentially, is this a path that is connected with a crosswalk to another side of the street, right, where there may be another curb ramp. So kind of understanding the context of the sidewalk network. In this case, this example was, you know, just one of the residential paths that would just, you know, kind of be on different points along a street, but really isn't part of the sidewalk network. But great point there to interject about how it depends on the current network and whether this is part of it or not.
Yeah, and as you're going through the Google Street View interface, you're able to scroll around and kind of see those context clues. All right, and we'll go to the next example. So is this an obstacle in the path? So looking where the label is placed, so that pole in the sidewalk, would that be rated as, would that be labeled as an obstacle in the path? And so here you can already kind of see the answer, agree. So as you can see here, it blocks the path. There isn't an alternative path. There isn't space to navigate around the pole. So it is an obstacle in the path. And I would also rate it a 5 because there's no way you're getting around that. And it also blocks where the curb ramp is as well. And as you can see on the right in the interface, it kind of provides, as you're validating, it'll provide examples of what an obstacle in the path looks like and what doesn't qualify as an obstacle in the path, kind of help the validator by providing examples. We'll go to the next example. And so this is an example. Somebody labeled this utility panel as a surface problem. And surface problems often have to do with uneven surfaces. And so here, the answer would be disagree because this utility panel is not in the pedestrian path. So oftentimes we'll have people who label holes or utility panels off the path as surface problems, but really within this interface, we encourage people to only label obstacles and surface problems on the pedestrian path, on the sidewalk network, not in the street and not off the sidewalk network. So we would press disagree. All right, so some additional notes on validation. So as Yohei kind of mentioned earlier, there are different approaches to validating a to auditing a community and in the labeling and the validation process. So communities can choose to keep the auditing process in-house or to engage the public. And this is the same for the validation process. So sometimes we'll train specific people, like specific interns or people involved in the process on the validation and only allow them to validate a community. And other times we can train the community and encourage even the validation process to be a crowdsourced approach. And then, with the afterwards, when all the labels are validated, when you choose to export your data, you can choose only labels that have been validated versus ones that have been invalidated or marked incorrect to improve the accuracy and validity of the data you collect from Project Sidewalk.
Great. All right, thanks, Mackenzie. We'll go through now some examples of data visualization and how all this data that can be collected from Project Sidewalk can be utilized. So data visualizations, right, can be a useful tool for grant applications. Maggie will go over a little bit more about this in relation to the ITEP grant. But you're probably aware maps and images can contribute to telling the story of the needed improvements in your community. And Project Sidewalk is a way to quickly gather that and provide images and map data to help tell your story and identify areas of needed improvement in the pedestrian network. So I'm thinking about where in your community is an important area to develop a project to seek grant funding for. So one of the tools in the Project Sidewalk website, if you're on it already, or if you want to go later on, one of the tools there is called the label map, and this is just simply representing all the different data that's been collected. In this case, in the city of Chicago, you can also go to some of our other cities as well in the drop down. You want to change to any of the other cities we have open nationally and internationally. You can see that our interface has also been translated to Spanish, so you can engage the Spanish-speaking community as well, and I think a few other languages as well. So this map is showing specifically the Chicago area and the surrounding communities, and these are just the communities that we've worked with. So part of our process in terms of opening an area starts with engagement from the community, and that community kind of wanting us to open up an area and start to collect some data for that area. You can see there's been a few wards in the city of Chicago that we've worked with, as well as they've used the tool for helping prioritize some of their infrastructure menu funds. When you're on the label map, it's some very simple tools for zooming in and out, and then for filtering. So we can filter by the different types of labels, as well as the severity of the labels themselves. So here's an example of, filtering to just show obstacles in the path and surface problems that have a severity rating of 3 or more, and that have been validated correct. So that's what's being shown here. And another feature on Project Sidewalk is what we call Sidewalk Gallery. So it's one of the other tools in the drop down there. And this is a really nice way to help in terms of kind of seeing all the imagery of the labeled features. So here, again, there's some different filtering options you could see on the left side, where you could kind of just look at specific label types and severities, and then as well as specific tags. So maybe if you wanted to, if fire hydrants and poles were critical type of obstacles, you could filter on just those types of tags. When you go in here as well, this is also a quick way to do validations, because you can validate other people's labels as well. And you could see here some examples of, there's a little like thumbs up and thumbs down sign for different features on here. And of course, there could be ones that people maybe disagree on. And those can be valuable to explore in more detail as well. And then as we mentioned earlier, we have an API on the website as well, so that you can export this data into a shapefile if you're using some kind of geographic information system, or kind of directly into an online map. So we've been in our work and helping some communities, we've assisted them by creating ArcGIS online maps and bringing in the live Project Sidewalk data to then layer on additional features, right, that help give you the context more and help prioritize areas. So here's an example of that in this map that Mackenzie created, kind of showing the Project Sidewalk data that's been filtered for just obstacles and surface problems that have a higher severity, right? And Mackenzie has kind of pointed out some specific areas, like a route to a school might be an important area for a project, right? And overlaying where there are hospital locations or transit stops. So you could see kind of at the bottom part of this map, there's a few different transit stops, and then those little red dots are areas where there's problematic sidewalks. So this may be a corridor that and Maggie will explain a little bit more about the kind of need to find a larger area, not just one specific sidewalk problem, but finding a corridor or at least maybe a block. Maggie will explain more. And again, this is just another way that you can overlay the data, right, to prioritize these locations. And then, what I think is really powerful is kind of combining, right, these maps that show where the labels are with the degree, the imagery of Google Street View as well. So for instance, you could create a graphic like this where you're showing that on this again, I'm just showing like this is in Harvey, Illinois now, where we've done some work, and you could see all these little circles are curb ramps and sidewalk surface problems that have a rating of 4 or greater. And this is then showing the imagery of what that means, right? And so clearly this is a path right next to a school that has a good deal of surface problems and curb ramp problems, and potentially could be a priority area. So in summary, kind of what the Project Sidewalk resources enable is training for any of the folks who want to be involved in this, technical assistance with data collection and validation. We have a variety of outreach materials that could help in terms of, some of those initial steps. Obviously, it's not things that are too difficult, but things that I think make the step of actually committing to and engaging the public a little easier and getting them involved. And then the data is free and open source, and the data and maps as well. And then, for this process specifically, and this time of year, we're interested in also helping to provide technical assistance with visualizations. I know there was a question in the chat here about kind of how that happens, and we've been using ArcGIS Online for that, and could work, potentially with a community or group to support that as well. So that is all for me. I'm going to turn it over to Maggie to now talk about ITEP and how Project Sidewalk can be woven together with these kind of grant applications.
Great, thanks, Yohai. So again, my name is Maggie Shawinski from the Active Transportation Alliance, and ITEP, if you're not familiar with it, stands for the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program. And next slide. And it is a state and federal funding program. It's a mix of both funding sources administered by the Illinois Department of Transportation. And I would say it is the most important source of funding for walking, biking, and trails in our state. This program comes along every 2 years, so it's on even years. So 2024 is the year. The call for proposals opens this August at the beginning of the month and will close by the end of September. And this year, there's $140 million available, which is the highest amount I'm aware of ever being. It's a great year to apply for this funding. And we do have a poll because we're curious of those who are here. Are you planning to apply for ITEP? And yes, no, or maybe you're not sure yet. And that's fine too, but I'm curious to see where this group is at. Give you a few seconds to submit. Christina, can we show the results? All right, what do we have here? So we've got 43% who are applying this year, a few that are not, and then like the other half are maybe not sure. So, and that's totally fine. And right now is really the time to be thinking about like whether you're gonna apply, jump into this. But again, it's a great opportunity. There's a lot of funding available this year, so definitely encourage you to just think through potential project locations and potentially using Project Sidewalk to help you do that. So next slide. So the last cycle in 2022, there were a bit over 200 applications submitted to IDOT and 73 projects were awarded funding. So unfortunately, I wish everyone could get funding for walking and biking projects in their community. But during the last cycle, there was 129 million available. So again, there's a little more available this year. Average funding per project was around 1.7 million. And then you can see in that map, those are dots of where projects were scattered throughout the state. And we do end up seeing a lot of projects in the Chicagoland region. So next slide. Some examples of some past ITEP awards that were focused on pedestrian infrastructure. So Prospect Heights was awarded funding for a sidewalk connectivity project along Wolf Road. The city of McHenry received funding along Route 31 for sidewalks on one side, a side path on the other, as well as pedestrian lighting throughout. Flossmoor received funding for a variety of different pedestrian facilities, so sidewalks, crosswalk, curb ramp, or curb bump out, as well as streetscaping or landscaping in their central business district. And Lake County received funding along Route 137 for the Patriot Path Trail to continue building on that project. Next slide. So who can apply? It's really some agency with taxing authority. It's typically municipalities or county governments that we see applying, but there are other eligible applicants like transit agencies, school districts, tribal governments, and we have all of this type of information. You might already be aware of this, but it's all on our website, and we'll make sure you have the link to that, as well as we'll be hosting some webinars, and we'll be getting into more of the details later. But next slide. And a few key points just to keep in mind as you're thinking about what kind of project you could select if you don't have a project in mind already. So your project must be serving a transportation purpose. It can't be solely for recreation, so it does need to connect people to destinations. It could be like, I feel like often it's like a mile, 2 mile, or maybe more of a corridor stretch, or an area like that example from Flossmoor that they looked at their central business district. Projects can't be solely for routine maintenance, and projects are capped at $3 million per project. So sometimes if you do have a really big project, I've seen communities just break it up into, they'll do like the first mile or two of the project and then continue on in future grant cycles to keep building on the project. The grant it's a reimbursable project, so that, or program, so that means that whoever is applying has to pay for the project initially, and IDOT will reimburse you. And then there is a local match. So typically it's a 20% local match, but there is a sliding scale based on something called the community score. And IDOT provides you with a map, and you map out where is your project location, and it looks at poverty level rates, income level, population, and some other factors to give you a community score. And so within the application pool, whichever applications that are going to be awarded funding show that they have the highest need, so higher poverty rates or lower income levels, might see a 10% local match or a 0% local match. So we've seen a lot of communities, get a project completely funded, no local match required, which is great. Next slide. And then just want to briefly mention some pedestrian facilities that are eligible for funding that Project Sidewalk could really help identify. So new sidewalks is one, as well as replacing or reconstructing existing sidewalks. So if you're finding through a sidewalk audit that your sidewalks aren't in great shape, those could be replaced, and then adding ADA compliance, making sure they're accessible to everyone. What's not eligible related to sidewalks is maintenance. So you can't be repairing a broken sidewalk or fixing a crack. It has to be a completely new sidewalk. So just keep that in mind if you're utilizing Project Sidewalk. And next slide. And then real briefly, so sidewalks or side paths are also eligible, as well as multi-use trails. Next slide. And related to crossing facilities, ITEP can help you fund crosswalks, pedestrian islands, like in this photo, and next slide, as well as rectangular rapid flashing beacons, so RRFBs, and countdown signals or pedestrian signals at traffic lights. Next slide. And then you can also include other pedestrian features in your project. So again, like you can add a combination of a lot of different projects. So other facilities could be curb ramps, curb bump outs, pedestrian lighting, permanent benches, signage, landscaping. And one thing I didn't add here is utility relocation. So with Project Sidewalk, showing where those obstacles are, that could alert you to like, okay, we could, perhaps move some of these utilities, and you can use ITEP funding for that. And again, like I'm just covering the pedestrian facilities. So there's also bicycle facilities that can also be funded through ITEP, as well as trail projects. Next slide. So just a few tips on characteristics of a good ITEP grant application. So your narrative that you're going to be writing about your project is very important for your scoring. And I would say, I feel like Project Sidewalk is a great tool for really like highlighting the need. Like why is this project needed? Because you're missing sidewalks, or they're not, there's a lot of obstacles, they're in poor condition, and also showing that there is transportation needs, so that you're connecting people from destination to destination. So as Mackenzie was showing, like highlighting where there are schools or businesses or transit stations or healthcare facilities, residential areas, and showing that your project is getting people from place to place. And also showing that you've engaged your community. And I think, again, Project Sidewalk really helps you engage others. And I can really see like getting a school involved and students involved in something like this, or just a community group would, I can just see it being a great, that all of those groups being a great resource for helping you choose a project and getting people excited about improving walking projects in your community. And then also for your grant, including photos, maps, illustrations can be beneficial. And what you're able to show via Project Sidewalk, I think could help really showcase, the need and the transportation connections that is important to highlight in your narrative. And just a note on that, you have to be selective on what you're going to include in your application, because there is a size limit for ITEP where you can't submit more than 35 megabytes within your application. And then finally, showing if using Sidewalk or using Project Sidewalk to prioritize and choose projects where there is higher need based on demographic data. Those projects are more likely to qualify for that reduced local match of 10% or 0%. So I think this tool can really help you zoom into where that need is. So next slide. And just a few resources to leave you with. So we've got on our website, activetrans.org/ITEP, we have a lot of resources. So during the last cycle, 2022, we had a webinar series, and those recordings are available that just go over all the details about the ITEP program. We also have a list of answers to frequently asked questions, as well as a list of engineering firms that offer pro bono support to communities, but it's also a good list to just check out for. You can hire those engineering firms as well to provide application support. And then there are a handful of other documents available on that link. For example, you have to submit a resolution to show that your city council or village trustees are supportive of this project, and there's a sample resolution on that website. Next slide. And we are planning on doing another webinar series this year. So the first one will be on July 10th. We're teaming up with IDOT as well as Illinois Public Health Institute to offer these webinars. The first webinar, Wednesday, it's 11:30 a.m. Until 1, so an hour and a half. And we'll be going over the basics of ITEP, what types of projects are eligible. So just more details on all of that, as well as best practices, tips for your application. The second webinar is on August 21st, also Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. And we'll dig more into scoring. We'll walk through the application, and IDOT has said that there are some changes this year. And so if you've already applied to ITEP in the past, this might be the webinar to attend, just so you're aware of what the changes are. And then IDOT will also be on hand to answer any questions. And then finally, the last webinar is September 11th at 11:30 a.m. And that will be solely with IDOT staff to answer any questions, because the deadline will be only a couple weeks after that webinar. So that's a good time to, ask any last minute questions that are popping up for you for your application. And next slide. So just a few thoughts or tips for you on getting started. So if you're thinking about applying for ITEP, you're just not sure yet, if you want to do this, I would say, give Project Sidewalk a try and, see if you can narrow down a project or an area in your community that really could use better pedestrian infrastructure. So, again, the first step is choosing a project and making the case for that project. And IDOT often, when we have the webinars, there are a lot of very specific questions for each individual project. Every project is unique. So they always say, reach out to your local roads office at IDOT and, you know, verify with them that, like, is your project eligible? Would it, like, just get their buy-in, like, what do they think of your project? And they'll also help you with any questions, one-on-one. And then, so, you know, after you've got your project selected, you've sorted out the questions you have, one recommendation is, if possible, try to get phase 1 engineering started. ITEP can fund ITEP or phase 1 engineering, but your score will be improved if you've completed phase 1 engineering for your project, or if it's been at least started. So just a tip to improve your score. And then finally, just a reminder that we have this list of engineering firms that offer pro bono support for, you know, higher need communities, but also it's a great list to refer to for, you know, a lot of firms will help you with scoping out a project and choosing a project, and or with actually help writing your application. So quick question. We do have one more poll, and we're just curious. Do you have a project in mind already, and what type of project do you have in mind? Is it a bicycle project? Is it a pedestrian project? Is it a combination bicycle pedestrian project? Is it a trail project, or is it something else that's not listed here? Or maybe you're again, you know, you're not sure, or you're not applying. So just again, curious about what this crowd is thinking for ITEP. Give you 10 more seconds or so to fill that out, and can close it. All right, Crispina, I want to share the results. All right, so great. So it looks like there's 50% are thinking about bicycle pedestrian combination project, which I think is a great idea, thinking about complete streets. And 20% thinking about a pedestrian project, also very smart. I think pedestrian, there are like limited funding opportunities for funding pedestrian infrastructure. So utilizing ITEP for pedestrian infrastructure is a very smart decision, I think. So, and a handful are also undecided or not applying. So, all right, thanks for answering that poll. So next slide, I think this is one last point to leave you with. So there are other grants and programs to consider that you can you know, use. Project Sidewalk can be a valuable tool again to help you narrow down project areas that you want to find funding for. There are 2 federal grants out there right now: Safe Streets for All and Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program, with deadlines this spring and summer to consider. There's Safe Routes to School grant, so that awards are from the last cycle, I think, are going to be announced soon, sometime this spring, but the next round of funding will open in 2025. So I really think Project Sidewalk could be a great fit for Safe Routes to School. You can just narrow into a school and audit around specific schools. Invest in Cook, for those of you in Cook County, great funding source for funding sidewalk and pedestrian projects. And then CMAP's Local Technical Assistance Program. I can see Project Sidewalk just being a great fit with that program, just to, like, that program can help you fund a bicycle pedestrian plan, an ADA transition plan. So using Project Sidewalk to collect community input for those plans, I think could be useful. But next slide, and I think I'll pass it back to Yohai and Mackenzie.
All right, thanks so much, Maggie, and really glad we could get this overview and understanding of the ITEP process and how Project Sidewalk could be linked to it. So just sharing a few next steps, and then we have hopefully a few minutes for questions. As a next step for those who are interested, we have a Google form here. Maybe Mackenzie, you could drop it in the chat. And this is just if you're interested in kind of moving forward, we were gonna plan a follow-up workshop where we would do a deeper dive into the training and then the planning of implementation. So thinking about, who do you need to be involved? Who can potentially be the kind of lead in-house, and then what community groups might you invite to be part of this process to make it successful, whether it's, a group from a school or a library or another community group, ped bike group. We can get those folks involved to kind of be a part of this next workshop to kind of move forward with using Project Sidewalk. I suggest having, a lot of times there's this, not just one person involved in this, so having some interdepartmental conversations with other staff, engaging community groups that you think might be interested in being a part of this, right? I think Maggie shared as well, having community involvement, showing that, having that be part of your story. You can start that now. And then moving forward from there, it's getting started with collecting data, and then Maggie shared already some additional ITEP webinars that BTA will be setting up later this summer. So why don't I stop there and see if folks, what questions folks have about Project Sidewalk or ITEP, or how to